although not so many people are here, we have lots of people, thousands in fact more than thousands of people watching this on the web. Z24 Ghonta's digital platform is there, and also, of course, Earth.live. There is going to be a very, very dramatic change of subject. Once again, it is going to be part of our holistic quest for our own identities. But this time, it relates to another aspect which is so very prominent in the eastern part of our country, which is Tantra. Yes, we have all heard of Tantra, but how much do we know about it? Demystifying Tantra is going to be our next presentation. And we have Madhu Khanna, who is an author, scholar of Indie studies, cultural researcher, a truth seeker, and a visionary, as also Dr. Prem Saran, a retired bureaucrat of the Indian Administrative Service, and he has also been the Vice Chancellor of a university between 2012 and 13. Most importantly, what is relevant here is that he's a scholar on Tantra and has authored several books on the subject. We have Rajiv Sharma, who's a practicing hereditary Chandi Pathak priest, and he is very much into the praxis of Tantra. Moderating this session is Dr. Vikram Sampath, and may we request Dr. Vikram Sampath to do the honors of felicitating the speakers who would now endeavor to demystify Tantra. Madhu Khanna ji, Dr. Prem Saran, and Rajiv Sharma ji. Vikram, it's all yours.
A very good afternoon, everyone. And I think I have a very distinguished panel of a former bureaucrat, an academician, and a practitioner of Tantra. The word Tantra, I think, conjures so many meanings in so many people, and I think a lot of this is thanks to the distortion due to popular media. I mean, people would probably think someone practicing Tantra is a tantric with long hair and pronouncing abracadabra mantras, and suddenly you're asked all kinds of questions. Can you convert a goat into a human being, and vice versa, and all of that? They do black magic, they do all of that. But all of these distinguished people being practitioners of Tantra, you see that they're all very normal people. So the first and foremost thing that I would probably like to start this session, since we're calling it Demystifying Tantra, what are the popular misconceptions around this word, much maligned word, much misunderstood word? And a lot of it also, I think, as Pawan Vermaji put it, it's the colonial writings of the British, who just could not understand the many facets of Tantra, from eroticism to just understanding the concept of this philosophy, who kind of demonized it, and that's come down through the ages. So I would like to start with the distinguished woman on the panel, Dr. Madhu Khanna ji, to probably lead us through some of these popular misconceptions and what exactly is the reality between these misconceptions. It's on.
Is it on? Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Thank you very much, Vikram, for inviting me. And I really want to congratulate ZTV and Madam here, who had the vision that culture is important. And within culture, when we talk of Bengal, I would say Tantra is important. Because if I were to quote S.C. Banerjee, who's one of a well-known scholar who has written on Bengal Tantras, and he's written a couple of volumes, he says that in Bengal, people breathe sing, dance, and live Tantra day by day, whether they understand it or not. And indeed, when we saw the dance performance in the morning, the greatest goddess, Durga Kali, the amount of work that has been done by Sanskrit scholars and great patrons to promote the worship of Goddess Kali, who is essentially a tantric goddess. When you look at the texts and sources of how she has been envisioned. So I'm very happy to be present here in the land of Tantra. Okay, and as you said, Vikram, you know, Tantra is a very mysterious term, and there are many reasons for it. So I think I'm going to start with precisely what you've asked me to talk about. So I call it the buzzword Tantra. Because I got into tantric studies in my early 20s, and I was fascinated by tantric art because some great books had come out. And to me, the abstraction of the yantra is symbolism, which is a Hindu counterpart of Buddhist mandala, by the way, was just mind-boggling. That how is it that an ancient tradition, which our roots go back to really 2,500 years old or even older, how is it that these great sages, masters, patrons of art could have created an art which is so contemporary? If you didn't read the captions of those paintings, you'll think that a modern artist has devised those. So I got into it, and then I was very fortunate to do research. But of course, I must confess, in the public domain today, after many, many years, because I'm an old lady now, that it's Tantra that chose me, and I haven't chosen Tantra. So since it chose me, I obviously have moved on with the burden of understanding it. So coming to the buzzword Tantra, what is buzzword Tantra? Hello, can you see the first slide, please? Okay, now we know that, now Tantra, within the Tantric heritage or tradition, it's a very, very big tradition, multiple, historically multiple, regionally multiple also in terms of its visualizations and as well as its modes of worship. And you can actually create a hierarchy of it. But what is interesting is that it is very much part of the popular stream of religiosity in India. So now I think what is the societal image of a tantric? Can you show us the first slide? Yeah. This is a collage that I did some years ago. I wrote something on Bazari Tantra. Now, the societal image of a tantric is that he's a wonder worker who lives in a sort of a, mysterious world of mantra power. And I would say an obscure, I'm sorry I can't pronounce this, paradise of obscure realities. And one who is engaged in various pujas and rituals, and he finds solutions for every life crisis problem that one has. And you were right when you said that, media has played a very big role. And I remember many years back, there was a film, in fact, on Zee television, on Aghora cult of India. And that film, of course, did not tell us what the symbolism and philosophy of Aghora is. It just was very literal, showing, yogis in the cremation ground and, eating all kinds of flesh and meat and offering liquor, etc. I even received a phone call from somebody saying, well, why don't you come and advise us? But I just felt the time was not ripe. There's a time for everything. So these tantrics, they call themselves tantrics, and I tend to call it Laukik or pop stream, a pop stream of Tantra. These are Laukik as against the more sophisticated forms of Tantra. Okay, so, can we see the next slide? So there are different forms, even at the local level. You have the Hindu tantrics, you have Muslim, Bengali, Kala Jadoo. They say that, we perform Kala Jadoo, some form of Sufi and Shefali and Suleimani and Rahmani forms. Now these were, and we all have seen, we have all seen how in the Sunday newspapers, there are many ads of these tantrics. So you have Mia Pasha Ji Bengali, who's a gold medalist. And you know, what does he do? क्या आप परेशान हैं? भूत प्रेत जादू टोना खिलाया हो, करवाया हो, संतान शादी में रुकावट, मन चाहा प्रेम, वशीकरण यंत्र, कारोबार, यात्रा, नौकरी जैसी, etc. So you see, this is the face of the market-oriented tantra, and it's a very, very important phase. We can't really, overlook it because they are there in dozens. I had done some research on it, and I was told by one of my informants that there are 10,000 of them around Delhi. Okay, can we see the next slide, please? So what do these tantrics do? These are self-confessed tantrics, and these are also lineage-based traditions, but the chart there gives you an idea of the kind of things they do. So if you look at family and marriage problems, obstacles to marriage, birth of a child, birth of a male child. Then if you see the next column, career and business, success in business, success in politics, foreign travel. Then we look at health and healing is a major thing. Then evil influences, the subjugation of enemies, bhoot, pret, etc., and other forms. And they are pretty popular, and they know how to advertise themselves. If you see, you have this take appointment to avoid disappointment. I thought that was pretty good. These are people. This is what I had collected from my so-called anthropological research. So this is one form of. But now let's get a little more serious. Can we see the next slide, please? Yeah, when you look at the tantric tradition as a whole, it's not just confined to India. In fact, some of the earliest form of tantras were written in China, and in Tibet. So you have, for instance, the great Mahavairochana Tantra, which was known in China and was popular in the Tang dynasty, and it went on. And then the same text is found in as Mahavairochana Sutra in Japan. And when you look at our borders, Pakistan has the biggest Hingalaj Nath Yogi shrine, a pilgrimage site, which is again a tantric pilgrimage site. So you see how widespread it is. Now, because it is widespread, it has a huge geoscape. At the same time, the tradition itself is complex. You can see it's not confined to one area. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, oh yes. Now this shows the hot spots of tantric worship and centers of tantric worship. I won't go into it very elaborately, but there are hundreds of hot spots, where Tantrism is popular all over India. But there are great centers of Tantra, Bengal being one, and Kashmir and South India. These are the three major centers which has created a huge tradition, literary tradition. Next. Yeah, I think it was important for me to look into and give you an idea of the etymological meanings of Tantra. And the reason for it is that just to introduce you to the diversity. Now, why is it important to look at these traditions this way? The reason is that unlike the great religious cultures of India, like Buddhism and Jainism, Tantra had no founder. It had no fixed text, like the Vedas, where you have, authoritative texts, and all the Brahmanical orthopraxy traces its sources from there. It developed, it's essentially a lineage-based culture which developed in different regions of India in different periods. And when we look at the early meaning of the term found in Rig Veda and Sam Veda, Tantra simply means a loom, a warp and woof of creation, but just a loom. But as we move along, can you please show the next slide? As we move along, when we come to, say, the 8th century and later, we find that the meaning of the term has changed. Now, Tantra, the word Tantra is used as a system of thought, a set of doctrine and practices, a theology, a philosophy of life, a way of being. And that is, when we come to Ram Kantha, who's a philosopher, and then Abhinav Gupta. And then the same idea is then carried over in other regions, that Tantra is a path of self-realization. And what it did, what it did was really to broaden the face of Hinduism in the sense that after post-medieval period, we find sudden resurgence of tantric sects all over India and, writings, etc. And then we see the emergence of what we call the sophisticated philosophical schools. And these schools have a well-defined philosophy, theology, ritual technology, and an unbroken lineage of gurus. And it's all intact in literature, and you can actually trace it. And that's where it really begins. And that's where we begin to understand and absorb the genius of Tantra, what it really meant, what it's all about. Now, next slide, please. So when we look at the philosophical schools, one of the greatest schools is, of course, emerged from Kashmir. And this school really comes together with the birth of Abhinav Gupta, the great prolific author, exegete, polymath, sage par excellence, who's known as a great unifier of literature, and he's written 35 volumes on a great text called The Mirror of Tantra, Tantra Lok, which runs into 35 volumes. Can we see the next slide? And of course, they were mainly Shaivites, and the Shaiva Advait Darshan starts from there, where he puts together the idea that there is one reality, there's one doctrine of one reality or universal consciousness called Chit, Ananda, as symbolized by Shiva, and his Shakti, who's his cosmic energy. I won't go into the complex areas of his philosophy. But what it did do was, he created a plinth of literally sowing the seeds for understanding of tantric philosophy. And when you see the chart on the right, that shows what a complex scriptural tradition we have in India. So we have the Vedas, and then we have the Agamas. Now, Agamas are 108 and over, and then the Tantras trace their allegiance to the Agamas. They have also integrated the Vedas. There is a Vedantized Tantra as well. It's one of the offshoots. But most of the Tantras, and they are mainly Shaivite. And from Shaivite, we have the emergence of Shakta Tantras and Tantras that are linked with Vishnu and the sectarian gods. And within the matrix of the Kashmiri tradition, there are many, many schools, different schools. There is a Spanda school, the Krama school, the Pratibhigya, which is a school of self-recognition, and of course the Kaula school, which is the most sophisticated because they believe in a bhoga-oriented yoga, which influenced the Bengal traditions themselves. Okay, now coming to Bengal very briefly, I'll be very brief. So when you come to Bengal, there are two streams next. Yeah. Now, Tantra is in Bengal is really comes together. There are two major streams of Tantra, and the first is, of course, the first is in Bengal. Tantra was promoted by the Pala kings. Of course, we know that Buddhist Tantras. And we know that the Pala kings had established a beautiful monastery, Vikramshila, and founded by the Pala king Dharmapala, and was a celebrated center of Vajrayana with an array of tantric preceptors, such as Atisha Dipankar, Kumar Jiva, etc. They're very well-known names. But the most interesting part of Bengal is that what we know as Sahajayan was promoted by the wandering Siddhas. They were a wandering cult of Siddhas, Mahasiddhas, and they were the founders of Vajrayana, and they were people from different social stratums, priestly class, and also, there were farmers and poets, etc. And what is interesting is that they were practitioners of Kundalini Yoga and Tantric disciplines. They were very close to the Natha Siddhas, Gorakhnath and Matsendranath tradition. But what was interesting was they were like psychonauts. And by psychonauts, we mean, just like an astronaut travels out to discover the world, a psychonaut goes inward, in that sense. They voyage in inner space of the self. So in that sense, and there were many yoginis who also contributed to this tradition. And what was interesting about the Bengali, these Mahasiddhas was that they wrote songs which came, spontaneous melodies, mystical songs. And in their mystical songs, we can understand what their philosophy was about. And they wrote in Sandha Bhasha, which is half expressed and half concealed. Now that takes me to, what was their real contribution? And after that, I will just wind up. Okay, now the Sahaja means really natural, original, that which is innate. It's a spiritual way of life that originated in Bengal among the Buddhist yogis and yoginis and siddhas. Now they believe that there is no sacred or profane, spiritual or sensual, but everything that lives is pure and void. In other words, A.K. Kumar Swami beautifully describes it. It was the last achievement of all thought because it breaks boundaries between what should be done, what should not be done. And it introduces a totally new form of spirituality. So it's a recognition of the unity of spirit and matter. Bhoga and yoga are one. Temple and cremation ground are one because many of the pujas are performed in the cremation ground. Body and cosmos are one because they had propounded this very unique kind of yoga. So they were radical, they were critics of caste system. They gave prominence to the feminine principle and to the woman, the real woman on earth. And they created a spontaneous spirituality through kaya sadhana, culture of the body, seeking spiritual experience through the senses. And all that is codified in the text called Charya Giti. So I think they've made a great contribution. And Bengal, unfortunately, whatever they produced during their time, all that was collected by a scholar, but the Bengali version of the work is lost. It exists in translation in Tibetan and Chinese translation. So we know about them through China and through other cultures. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you for your time, and thank you really for giving me this opportunity to do a very short kind of a overview of some of the ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhuji. I think that was very succinctly put because it's so difficult, I know, to summarize something like this in a 10, 15 minutes. But moving on, we have a practitioner of a culture which is very close to Bengal, which is Assam, Kamrup, the Kamakhya tradition. At a time when we talk of purity and so on, in temples, who enters, women of what age and at what time of the month she can or cannot enter the temple. We have a tradition of the Komaki Devi, who is actually the menstruating goddess. And 3 days in the year during the Ambubachi Mela, there's actually the celebration of her menstruation at that time. So somebody who's part of that tradition, we are lucky to have him here, Rajiv Sharmaji. I'd request you to make a brief overview of the Kamakhya tradition that's there in Assam.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion panel. Basically, Tantrism has got a long, illustrious history in India, Nepal, and Tibet. But once widely celebrated during the British Raj and those period, it somehow got a kind of notoriety that gradually it just diminished very gradually. But in case of Kamakya, what has happened is that the tradition is still alive. Is almost in its original form, which is very important because the lineage of the gurus and the disciples that us because we are the priest of the temple, so we are the Guru Shishya Parampara and the lineage are still alive. But the main problem is due to the fact that the tantric tradition or tantric marks or whatever the tradition is, gradually it has been wiped out from this country. It is a very least, it has remained a very least understood subject. And it has always been related with kind of magic and this and that and a lot of things which Dr. Madhu Khanna ji has already told. But for us, Tantra is perhaps the best defined as the energetic approach to the spiritual part, directing us to the self-realization, the realization of the absolute. And if we go back to the history of Tantra and Tantricism and the Tantric philosophy, we can go back to between 2nd century BC and 2nd century AD, and where at that time it used to be called Abhyasa Vijnana, that is psychophysical yogic sciences, Abhyasa Vijnana. And the first text on Tantra, it's by the Nagarjuna, the great Nagarjuna. It was the Guhya Samaja Tantra. And interestingly, the tradition has continued as a mixture of spiritual practices dominated by non-Vedic elements. But the Vedic elements has already got mixed up, and now we have a kind of mixture, kind of a tantric, tradition which prevails in this country right now. So even the great Adi Guru Shankaracharya, he also did a lot of great work on understanding the whole tradition of Tantra, and in his Sandhya, Lahari, the best text, he has mentioned about this whole tradition. And then we always talk about Hinduism. What is Hindu? Hindu is a Sanatana Dharma. And Sanatana Dharma means the ancient trade. It's not specifically Vedic Dharma. It's an ancient trade, Sanatana Dharma. And thus, Tantricism has remained the truth and being accepted as non-Hindu, non-Vedic Hindu order. Now, in geographical context, before coming to Kamakha, because the Tantra that prevailed, it prevailed across the Indian subcontinent. We cannot just think about India, which after 1947, that will be a very wrong approach to look into the whole perspective. So it was called Jambu Deepa. And Jambu Deepa was nicely divided into 3 krantas, the 3 areas. And according to the geographic and the anthropological aspect of the 3 krantas, the style and the different tradition of the style and the tradition of the Tantra was assigned, or it was there. Like the Sri Kula refers to the school of aesthetics. And zone for the school, Sri Kula has been assigned to Ratha Tantra. And it refers to the plain land from southern slope of the Nilgiri hills touching the sea in the peninsula. And the Kali Kula refers to transcendence. The suitable zone for this has been assigned as Ashwakranta, that is horse here. And the geographic context, the zone refers to Kailasa region of the Tibetan Himalayas, Nepal Hill, the northeast, which is called, now we call, Kamakha or Assam or whatever, the whole region. Then the Tarakula, it refers to the Tibetan Himalayas and the Nepal Hills. Now, what Tantra and the human body, we see Tantra as something external. Something external. We'll do some rituals, this and that. That's a kind of magic and all kind of extra something will happen. It's not like that. Tantra is totally connected with the human body. It's an inseparable part of the human body, whole practice and the yogic practice and everything. So the no, I mean yeah. So and finally, Tantra and the worship of the goddesses. Now, since I'm from one place where the Tantric tradition is still alive in its almost, we can say, in its original form. So Tantra associated with the worship goddess and feminine aspect of the divinity, this is one of the prime features. Tantra provides a whole spiritual science for worship of the Divine Mother. Now, Tantra and science. Why? But this is a very scientific approach, because yoga and all kinds of meditational approach and pranayama, that is hatha yoga, all are connected with the whole tradition. So Tantra is a kind of science, the way of knowledge, both for understanding the outer world and the inner psyche. Tantra is allied with the alchemical tradition found throughout the medieval world. Alchemy, the whole body, our whole body operates through the principles or based on the principles of alchemy. So Tantra is one of the tools through which we can understand the alchemy of our own self. No, just. No, then we have to have.
So since you brought about alchemy and so on, I'd like to bring Dr. Prem sir in here and talk specifically about some of these techniques. What everyone talks about is Kundalini. So if you could very briefly tell us what that is and so on.
Thank you, Vikram. Let me first begin by briefly telling you how I got interested in the subject, because I was a typical Westernized, at the age of 26, I was a typical Westernized Indian with an engineering degree, an MBA from Kolkata, IIM Calcutta. Then I joined the IS. But strangely, when in my first posting as SDO as an SDO in Upper Assam, in a small bookshop, I came across a wonderful book by a great Indologist, and it was on Tantra. And so, fortuitously, within a few months, I also got initiation into the Tantric tradition at Kamakya Temple, where Rajiv lives. And thereafter, I decided to go into it academically, and I did Indology, an MBA, an MA in Indology at the University of Pennsylvania, and subsequently an MA and PhD in Anthropology at the University of California. Now, what did I get from my research and my personal praxis? First, from what I found out, I developed a model of Indian culture, because I realized that Tantra, the Tantric tradition, is something very basic to Indian culture. First of all, I realized that the selfhood of Indians has two aspects. There is the empirical ego, your sense of ahankara. But there is something else, a deeper self, which you arrive at through your sadhana, right? So, and that deeper self gives you the experience of ananda, mystical bliss. So this is so that brings us to the second part of my model, namely the idea of bhoga. Bhoga refers to this pleasure, the pleasure of the experience of the inner self, which gives you the ultimate relaxation that you can experience in life, the experience of samadhi. Samadhi doesn't mean that you die. It's an experience in which your ego is temporarily annihilated, which is the summit of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. And so that is the source of great pleasure. And then there is also the idea of Leela. Leela is the sense of that the cosmos, the universe, is a play. It's a divine play. So that is why Indians, especially in the Northeast, when I went to Assam, I realized that the Northeast is very different from South India. I'm from Kerala, and my wife is Assamese. It's very different from North India and South India because people are much more cheerful. There is a feeling of playfulness, but which is something that also makes Indians in general different from, say, Westerners. Because this is a comment that my PhD colleagues, one of my PhD colleagues made. She said that Indians are very playful intellectually, and that's very important for creativity. So now coming to the Tantric Sciences, let us look at science as a metaphor for something that's highly methodological and sophisticated. And that is where the whole Kundalini system of discipline comes in, yogic discipline. Because all these three themes are encapsulated there. There's yoga, because ultimately the aim of Kundalini is yoga, right? Then there is bhoga, because it's a Jungian. Jung was a great psychologist. It's a Jungian kind of integration of the self, because within every human being, male or female, there is the opposite existential principle, right? There is an inner woman, shall we say, and there is an outer, and there's in the male, and there's an inner, the animus in the female, the inner male. And finally, there is, that's where the idea of Ardhanarishwara comes in, because Shiva is, an important form of Shiva is Ardhanarishwara, the god who is half female, right? And finally, we have, what do we have? Yeah, that's Ardhanarishwari. So we have all these three things, ideas encapsulated in Kundalini meditation, because at the summit, when the Kundalini Devi rises to meet Shiva in the Sahasrara, in the top chakra, you have the experience of bliss or Ananda. Now, you see, since I'm an MBA from IIM Calcutta, I bootlegged all these ideas into my HR programs that I conduct for IAS, IPS officers and senior executives like in Tata's. And I teach a highly simplified Kundalini meditation. And within a few minutes, as few as say 3 or 4 minutes, people go into a deep state of relaxation and meditation. And also, and so I teach this as a way of inculcating peak performance and work-life balance in management. But finally, there's also a very important aspect of global outreach of Indian culture, because Tantra represents a play ethic. Unlike the American, especially, Protestant work ethic, which creates a lot of boredom, because how long can you work? I mean, workaholism has its limits. And so, because of this boredom, you have anomie, what Durkheim called anomies, hopelessness and things like that. In fact, that's what Mark Tully said, the British Britisher who became an Indian citizen. He said, in the West, things seem to be, Western culture is highly bleak, and that's why he became an Indian citizen, right? So in my, in the afterword of the second edition of my book, Yoga, Bhoga, and Ardhanarishwara, I've said that, Tantra can contribute to the re-enchantment of the world, so that you experience the world as sacred and divine. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think who could even imagine that something like Tantra is applicable to HR and leadership skills? So that was, it's just a beginning. Something as esoteric and as deep as Tantra cannot be explained and also communicated, I think, in 35 minutes. But I think if it has inculcated interest to learn more, to read more, I think our objective is achieved. Thank you so much to all the great scholars on this panel for communicating so wonderfully something that is so difficult to understand or even comprehend. Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you all.